Welcome to a emergency edition, the latest edition of Until Saturday. I am Ari Wasserman, joined by David Ubben, and one of our, if not the best guest, Scott Docterman. He has been on the show quite a bit over the course of the past few years and has taken quite a bit of verbal abuse from fans. He's had to continually talk about Iowa's offense, but today the day finally came that Iowa offensive coordinator Brian Ferentz, the son of head coach Kirk Ferentz, will not be back after the season. Scott, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well, man. It's hard to process this, though. It's been something that we've discussed different levels. For you guys, it's been kind of comic relief in some ways, but it's provide content. For me, it's been a daily existence. No matter where I go, what I do, I could be, believe me, at a bar or the mall or let alone on my computer, and that's pretty much the first and only topic that I get to discuss. So it's a wild day in the land between two rivers.
It seems like Dave's having a hard time with this.
I mean, I'm gonna miss it. It's been tough. When I heard the news, I just
not a funeral, man.
I just kind of sat and I just felt my feelings for a little bit, and I thought of all the fun we could have on Saturday nights, Ari, that we're not going to get to have for the next 6 weeks, and I just it's tough. It's tough. I'm going through it today, but Scott, my biggest question that I think doesn't really make sense, and I'm hoping you can provide some level of context. Iowa didn't play a game last week. They've had an off week. Why did they not do this last Monday?
Well, it is a complicated situation, David. I mean, since it's not necessarily the head coach making this call, and in fact, he's nowhere to be seen on this statement because it's coming from the interim athletic director, and so this had been building over course of the fall, and it kind of came to a conclusion this weekend. So this could have been handled differently at any time, whether it was from Kirk Ferentz, Brian Ferentz, somewhat from Beth Getz. I mean, she is the interim athletic director after all. She should be the full-time AD, but so it's not necessarily one of these moves that gets made in traditional fashion. And it came to a head this weekend, and everybody started to find out it was supposed to be apparently kind of discreet and not known. Things like this get out very quickly, and here we are today. It is unusual, though. It would have been nicer if they would have known about it last week, but here we are today. That Brian Ferentz will be the coach or the offensive coordinator at least for 4 more games through the bowl game officially, but we'll see if what may happen in December.
It seems like a little naive from an administrative perspective. Like, as you said, in the world of college football, we've gotten a lot of entertainment out of this, but it's defined Iowa's program the last couple of years. It's a little naive that they could make this decision and have any misgivings that they could sort of quietly do it and that it wouldn't leak out for a month. That's kind of crazy to me.
Yeah, and maybe I'm not spinning it quite right on this, but I do think that it's something that's been discussed over, as you guys know, over and over. And here it's so intense that it came to a point where it was untenable for this program locally. And when you start to think about the future here, when you start to think about the transfer portals a month away, when the receivers have caught, I think it's 33 passes this year in 8 games. How many of them are going to hit the portal? How are they going to get anybody in the portal? So the fact that they're making this announcement early enough, or at least at this point, is to make sure that people know that, Iowa's going to do something differently. Maybe this quashes any thoughts that some of the key offensive players would have for entering the portal, and maybe gets them out and ahead of the marketplace when it comes to hiring a new offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I think getting bogged down on the timing of it is not necessarily is crazy to me. I think that, first of all, interim athletic director Beth Getz probably deserves a lot of credit for having to make what honestly might be one of the toughest decisions an athletic director at Iowa would ever have to make in terms of, the relationship between Brian and Kirk, but also not being the full-time athletic director and and kind of handling business in a way that probably should have been handled a year ago. I think that Gary Barta making the contract the way that it was, you outlined this in a very good column a month ago, Scott, of just a numbers game, takes out the human aspect of all this. And it became a joke. And we laughed about it on this podcast a lot. And, at a certain point a few weeks ago, I just stopped thinking it was funny. It's not funny. And I ended up writing a column, and you wrote a column on the same week. And it's just not the way it's supposed to go. So let me just, bear with me here. I'll read the statement real quick for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. But this is the statement that was released this afternoon from interim athletic director Beth Getz, as follows. Anyone who loves Iowa football recognizes both the success and challenges that have brought attention to our program this season. Our struggles on offense, coupled with the offensive coordinator's contract, make this a unique situation. After conversations with head coach Kirk Ferentz, coach Brian Ferentz, and President Wilson, I informed Brian that our intention is for him to be with us through the bowl game, but this is his last season with the program. Making this known today is the best interest of the program and its loyal fans, and it provides clarity during this pivotal time on the schedule. It is not my practice to be involved in assistant coaching decisions, and certainly not to make public such a change during a season. Our priority is to put all of our student athletes in its best position to have both short-term and long-term success on and off the field. Our football team has a group of outstanding young men and talented athletes who are 6-2, have a lot to play for. As a former athlete, I know every opportunity to put on that jersey is a cherished one. As Hawkeyes, let's continue to support all of our coaches, staff, student athletes in the pursuit of the Big Ten championship and bowl game victory. So there's one thing here that lights up to me, other than what you already alluded to here, Scott, which is Kirk Ferentz is not included into this statement anywhere. Also, this line, after conversations with head coach Kirk Ferentz, coach Brian Ferentz, and President Wilson, I informed Brian of our intentions. What is your understanding of how they arrived at this decision, and how do you view interim AD Getz for doing what she did?
She might be the most popular person on campus, and that was before what happened today. And now she could run for governor and win, even if she wasn't Republican, which is very rare in Iowa. I think she's, to be able to do this without having the full-time, label. First of all, I think it's a detriment to President Wilson to continue to make her an interim, because you got to have backing. She's going against, the most powerful person on campus, the highest paid employee in the state, and Kirk Ferentz. She needs that kind of backing, and maybe Barbara Wilson provided her that assurance, but still, to be an interim, that is awfully difficult. And I think the fact that, she did it this way, she's been nothing but, even from day one, when she became the interim, she's always kind of deflected off of the drive for 325 and instead said, we're about winning games. So, she used to be a soccer coach. She played soccer at Clemson. She's been in a lot of different places, and she just wanted it to be about winning games. Well, Iowa is 6-2, but let's face it, they're not a 6-2 team based on their offense. It's because their defense and special teams is elite, and their offense is the opposite of elite. So I think she recognizes that. She also recognizes that the fans have had it. I mean, they've sold out every game. That is not going to happen again if Brian Ferentz returns as coach. And so I think at this point, she had to make that call. She got enough backing to do it. But I think it's at this point, President Wilson better give her an assurance here or two, because to make this kind of move, there are other universities that are looking for ADs, and she would be just as good at Ohio State as she would be at Iowa.
It strikes me as somebody who's in this position making that decision while having the interim tag makes her a stronger candidate elsewhere.
No kidding. I mean, if you're Ohio State, who's looking for an athletic director, you immediately make that call. And I know she's turned down opportunities to interview at places because she expects to be or she wants to be the interim or the full-time AD here. But Barbara Wilson, what she did when Gary Barta stepped aside and retired was she'll be the interim through the fall, and then they'll open it up in January. However, every single coach that I've talked to has nothing but rave reviews for her, from women's basketball to wrestling to baseball, men's basketball, football for the most part. Although today I'm sure the head coach isn't feeling that way, on and on. So yeah, she made a huge tough decision, and she's made a lot of really good ones other than this too.
Yeah, you've alluded to some candidates, Scott, and I think we can talk about the future. But more than names, I think the more interesting question is just philosophically where you think Kirk Ferentz goes here. Because when you're sitting in this seat now as an Iowa football program, it feels hopeless. But I actually do think Washington is an interesting parallel because people forget how bad that offense was the last year under Jimmy Lake. I think they ranked 113th in offensive yards per play. In year one, under Kalen DeBoer and Ryan Grubb, they were number 10. This year, they're number 2. In the portal era, you can fix a side of the ball to some degree very quickly. And the personnel is not terrible from Iowa. And again, you can plug and play some guys. And I think it's reasonable to be an average offense next year immediately, if not better. But when you look at what you think Kirk Ferentz wants to do with this offense, where do you think he goes? Like I said, more so than names, but philosophically.
I think whoever takes over, he's going to try to be a balanced offense, one that's going to be run based, one that's also going to be interested in kind of ground acquisition football. Because I think, first of all, when you look at where Iowa is located, the amount of top recruits, I mean, there's more than there used to be, but there's probably in the neighborhood of 10 to 12 legitimate Division I candidate or players in the state of Iowa, although they consider the Chicagoland, part of Iowa because it's actually closer than, say, the western border. But still, they're not going to be able to go out and get 4-3 wide receivers, and so they're going to try to build line of scrimmage football. But they're going to have to improve through the air. That is the first step for this program, is trying to do something that way. Now, will Kirk Ferentz allow that to happen? That's where he needs to change. And this has kind of been my hallmark, or my thought of Kirk is, with 200 plus wins, third in Big Ten history, he's a Hall of Fame caliber coach, but he's not a generational coach because he's unwilling to evolve on that side of the ball to make him be at that level that we've seen like Nick Saban do. And I think that's what he needs to do, is take a step back, provide a foundation. We want to run the football. We like zone blocking. This is the way we want to accomplish it, but then turn it over. Now, when he's hired assistant coaches, they almost all have had some sort of connection to him. The easy one, and this would be the frustrating choice, would be for senior analyst John Budmeyer to become the offensive coordinator. They brought him in 2 years ago as kind of an analyst, and he's kind of worked around the edges. That would just be more of the same. Maybe he's a better play caller. Maybe he's a better schemer, but it's more of the same. I think, what he needs to do is try to get somebody that gets him out of his comfort zone and allows him to do what he wants, because he's really let down his defense in the last couple of years.
And we're not looking for an offense here that's going to be averaging 46 points a game here. We're looking for an offense that can, rank in the 40s or 50s like they had in the 17, 18, 19 years, right? Like, we're not looking for, the complementary football thing, I think makes a lot of sense. And I feel like the way Iowa plays the game actually is very good if you have a team that can take advantage of what that defense is doing. And when I say take advantage of it, I mean score pretty effectively or get first downs or move the football in a fashion that wasn't pathetic. Now, my number one takeaway from this whole thing, Scott, not to bring it back from the future, is that, one, he was hired in his early 30s without any coordinator experience, right? Mm-hmm. I think that this is a lesson that moving forward that sports fans should probably not tolerate hires like that. I don't know what the tenor was around the Iowa football program when that move was made, but I don't remember it having a lot of backlash. I don't know what you remember of it. And two, as we look back at what the Brian Ferentz era, how it ended, I mean, it was obviously going to be problematic because of the relationship he had with the coach. But, I feel like Kirk Ferentz let down Brian Ferentz more than the other way around. He put him in a position where he wasn't qualified for a job. That job led to high scrutiny. They put him in a situation where they had a contract that was easy to make fun of. They failed again. And now the man who was actually a very good offensive line coach, and I think has multiple Joe Moorhead Award-winning offensive lines at Iowa, is a laughingstock. Now, I'm sure he's going to find a job. But to me, the overall lesson of this whole thing is this wasn't kosher from the beginning. This wasn't the way you operate.
Well,
and
they
in
did
a
have some
world,
good years early on, Ari.
what?
They did have some good years early on.
I just don't know if anybody could have a move like this in the future at any position and it'd be okay.
Yeah.
Because
get it.
even if they had a
Yeah.
few good years early on, the position that they're in right now, it almost felt like an inevitability. And I actually wrote maybe one of the most scathing columns of my career about this a few weeks ago, and I actually feel bad for the man. I mean, is that a fair thought process, Scott, or are you with me on that, or where am I missing the mark on that?
No, yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I've argued, I have to argue out of both sides of my mouth almost every day when it comes to this with a lot of Iowa fans. I mean, the one thing that he did do, and just to provide a little background, is he was with the Patriots for 4 to 5 years. He was the tight ends coach. I talked to Rob Gronkowski this year, and in the past, he said he's the one who taught me how to block. And I believe that because, I mean, his dad is a guru when it comes to that kind of thing. And then he came to Iowa as offensive line coach. He elevated to run game coordinator for 2 years. And in that role, they really had a couple of nice years running the football. So the next step in that escalation is become the offensive coordinator. And from in 18 and in 20, they averaged almost 32 points a game. So they were in a decent situation. The problem was everything collapsed at the same time, whether it was recruits not panning out, subpar quarterback play, attrition, injuries, but he had found no way to really stabilize it.
But isn't that usually when things would go wrong for a new guy?
Absolutely.
2 or 3 years in? I mean, that's kind of where you really get the temperature or something.
Yeah, but the first year was, I mean, it was really bad in Greg Davis's last year too. I mean, in 3 out of their last 4 games in 2016, they threw for 80 yards or less with an NFL quarterback who's still on an NFL roster, and CJ Beathard. So it wasn't, he was starting at kind of ground zero, kind of built their way up. They did a nice job. They had a quarterback, but here's the numbers that really stand out. In his first 3 years as coordinator, he had a quarterback who threw for 68 touchdowns. The last 4 years, they've thrown for 34 total. And I think part of the problem that I have, or I've noticed, is that there's not a way to help his players succeed. I did this today. I kind of went through some of the schematics, and I'm like, these are easy schematics. Why aren't they doing this? And that's a
good story.
Issue.
You were the offensive coordinator for about an hour there, Scott.
Yeah, I think until people started hating me, I think it was okay.
Dave, I think we got to ask this question. You want to ask it together? What does this mean for Kirk Ferentz? And I'm assuming he probably had a pretty rough day today. I don't feel bad for him in that regard, but at the same time, I know he's an Iowa institution who has won a lot of games there and has stabilized a program that's been as consistent as humanly possible over the course of his tenure. Is this the beginning of the end there too, or do you think that he still has a lot of time left after how this is ending?
That's a great question, because will he be, I mean, he's going to be agitated for a while because of this, no question. But he's got a contract now through 2030. And he's in good enough shape to where he can take this and run with it if he wants to, or he's 68 years old and can say, you know what, I'm just done. I'm not going to do this anymore, not work for her and what have you. And so it could go either way. From what I've gathered over the last couple of months, he's not going to leave, even if Brian does leave. But I think this is the final step in his process of being a career, is that if you can revitalize this offense and be out of your comfort zone and keep Phil Parker on defense, that maybe adding these 4 teams from the Pac-12 and playing the East Division teams, you're still going to be okay. You're still going to compete. They've done a nice job of that up until the last couple of years, but if he continues to let it flounder, if he does the easy thing, which is, stick around, but make the easy hire, do the same thing offensively, then you're going to see this program languish and be a 6 win team, which that's won more than 7 games every year since 2015.
Is that, I mean, we didn't hear from Kirk today, obviously, but you've been around the program. You sort of know how his mind has processed a lot of this. Do you really think Kirk, when he saw this or was told this today, that he felt like this was unfair?
Great question. I'm
We are
trying to-
reporters, Scott.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to think, just because he can get very he can be defiant at times. Like, I'll give you something from back when they had the Rhabdo incident. I don't know, David, I'm sure you remember that. Way back when, and I think it was 11 or 12 players ended up in the hospital with rhabdomyolysis diagnosis from a crazy, stupid workout that Chris Doyle put him through. And then Doyle got a lot of angry feedback for that. And then Kirk at a iClub rally just said, I'm giving him my assistant coach of the year award, and kind of a middle finger to Gary Barta and everybody else. And that's when Gary Barta should have stepped in and said, I'm in charge here. And instead he didn't. He allowed him to become kind of a kingdom and a fiefdom. And then 3 years ago, they had a real explosive situation that he survived. But so he's done a really good job in adverse situations, but he's also has a way about him where I'm sure he's pissed off. I'm sure he feels like that, somebody did something that was beyond what their reach should be. However, if he realizes, and I think Ari, you brought this up a little bit ago, that he's the one who caused this.
Yeah.
And I have a son who's 24 years old. I can't imagine that putting him through all of this and making him go out there and hearing chants of 65 to 70,000 people chanting "Fire Brian," and people wearing shirts that say "Fire Brian" and sweatshirts in town and everywhere you go. I mean, his son has extra security. I mean, that's a lot, and so I think they could have gotten ahead of this by Brian announcing it instead of letting Beth Getz do it. But they decided to handle it this way. So I'm anxious to see how Kirk is tomorrow, to see if he's angry and bitter, if he just defers all comment to Beth Getz, or if he owns it.
Did Brian consider stealing signs?
Well, Michigan was here doing that a couple of years ago. I do know that for a fact, but no.
How many signs do you think Iowa has? Like 4?
Run left, run right.
Run left, incomplete pass. No, that's mean. Okay. Hey, one thing I wanted to say before we got out of here is Scott is one of the FWAA's beat writers of the year. So I wanted to publicly congratulate you for that honor and achievement. I think you're one of the better reporters on our entire staff, and it's been a pleasure working with you. I wanted to make sure that people listening heard that, and also too for how good of a reporter that you are. It is pretty cool to have those layup days where you just go to the office knowing that, you're talking to Kirk Ferentz, and whatever happens there is going to be a great story, and you're going to get to do what you got to do. Like, are you looking forward to kind of having that day and having those discussions with him?
Yeah. I mean, tomorrow is, is our one day of the week where we get players and Kirk Ferentz. It's going to be fascinating to see what they say. But, at some point I would like to get a little more background from them. I mean, my relationship with Brian Ferentz goes back a ways, and I was the only one this summer that he sat down with. I had a couple of hours with him, and a year ago we went like 6 hours going over game tape, and and it was everything from what went right against Ohio State in 2017, and he identified the plan and why it worked and what they were looking for. I mean, it was really well thought out, and he did a great job with it. And then a couple other games that were his stinkers, and there were a lot of those too. And we got, I wouldn't say in an argument or anything, but it was kind of it was the Northwestern game in 2020. It was during COVID. They lost 21-20. If they win that game, I think it's a really good game with Ohio State at the end of the year, because they won their last 6 games by 22 points a game. And we kind of went round and round over philosophically and what he decided to do. So I think I would like to hear their side of the story, whether it's open, or even if it's on the side, but either way, it's going to be an interesting week.
He's got enough capital that if he wants to let it fly, he can.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
oh yeah.
The thing that Dave taught me, was it you, Dave? Probably. I want to do it here. What you do is you put the oven on around 175 degrees. Is there anything that we forgot to ask, Scott, or a point that you wanted to make, or something that is pertinent that the audience should know?
Yeah, I mean, I think you brought it up a little bit in your column last week, Ari, and that was, what has gotten lost in this for a long time are the fans. The people who are reading our stuff, the people who are going to the games, and I mean, they are very loyal here. I mean, they sold out this season. They sold out last season. They've really embraced it all. They've tried to buy in, but they've been ridiculed and had a lot of stuff thrown their way. And I feel for them throughout this, and they've been tough to deal with at times too. But this is really kind of a day for them in some ways. Like, okay, there is a light at the end of this tunnel that's seemingly been going on for 25 years.
Well, I'm intrigued, Scott. It's going to be I imagine a weird last 4 weeks, a weird couple.
This team
off season
controls its own destiny in the Big Ten West. Still,
yeah.
Wouldn't it be something? Wouldn't it be something if
he starts dropping 48 a game and they win the Big Ten?
Yeah, I mean, they go to Indianapolis, and like the game that always stands out the most, and Brian was a big part of it, was against Michigan in 16, where they got run by Penn State the week before. They played Michigan the next week, number 2, 9-0. Harbaugh has that incredible defense, and they win 14-13 on the last play of the game. Can you imagine if they end up going to Indianapolis and winning like that? And then Brian Ferentz is walking up, like Brian Cox down the tunnel in Buffalo from when he was with the Dolphins.
I envision more of a who's the MMA fighter? I'm forgetting. Is it Conor McGregor? I'm envisioning more of a Conor McGregor walk from Brian Ferentz if they win. But don't say that idea too loud around Ari. He might snap.
Over under this week, 29.5.
Oh, I'm definitely taking the under on that. I mean, that's,
how low would it have to go before you took the over?
26.5, probably.
Oh, you just that extra field goal that's the difference for you?
Yeah, it is. Well, the last time they played in the Chicagoland, Iowa won 17-12. Last week they played Minnesota and it was 12-10. I think it's at Wrigley Field, and the highest scoring game there this year was 20-9. So wow. I think there's just this
Mr. Stats over here, huh? Yeah. That's why you win those awards, Dave. That's why you win those awards. Well, unless you've got anything else to add, Dave, I think that we basically covered it, and I'm sure we'll continue to follow the story as we continue on with our podcast and reporting this season. Scott, thank you so much for joining us live here on YouTube. And Dave, I always appreciate you not torpedoing a podcast with some weird menu item or food thing that you're doing. For everybody listening, be sure to follow Until Saturday on the YouTube channel. If you're here live, we appreciate you very much. If you'd love to get the podcast, the links to the podcast feed can be found in your show's description. If you're hearing this in your podcast feed, of course, vice versa, the YouTube link will be found in that description as well. I love the cross-pollination of the show. You should subscribe to both so that you can get both. Thanks so much, guys. For Scott Docterman, Dave Ubben, I'm Ari Wasserman. That was the latest emergency edition of Until Saturday.